Okay, Marty, we are live.
Yeah,
Coming
we
to
are
everyone from the Carina Nebula.
from the Careen. Is that what is behind us on there?
Yeah,
The
this is the
Carina
one of the
Nebula?
first big images that they released from the James Webb Space Telescope to wow everyone. And I still
It
love
is
it.
incredible because they don't even look real. Like when you see them, you're like, oh, that's a cool AI generated digital, not real thing.
Well, and this always looked so cool even from Hubble, and this is just so far beyond what Hubble could do. Just the level of detail to
Yeah,
resolve is amazing. So, anyway, that's where we
indeed.
are for those wondering. We do have people viewing now, so I think we can get to actual content.
We can get to actual conversation. We host these shindigs because we love to honor questions. We love to ask questions. We love to create space for other people to ask questions. We love to model, we love to remind ourselves, we love to practice. Um, we just had a interview today, Brent, for a episode that we were doing, and one of the things that was said was that God's people have to practice, 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 practice. These are not things we feel like they should come easily. We want them to come easily. We have to practice these things. So part of this is even a practice for us to interact with questions well, to honor them well, and hold them well, and respect other people as they ask questions. Even questions we think are dumb, but respect them anyway, because questions are gifts. And so, yeah, that's what we do here. That's what we're here for. The Q&A. Q&A. There we go, Brent. What else do we need to say before we get started?
Well, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. I have comments so far from Facebook and Twitter. We've got San Diego. We've got Brian. He doesn't say where he's from, but I know that he's in Missouri. We've got Doreen. She's in Florida. We've got Jordan from
Doreen.
Almsville. Hope I'm saying that right. I've just been speaking with Jordan over email, so good to see Jordan here. And yeah, I might be meeting Jordan actually in the coming days. I'm going to be in
Woo.
Eugene, Oregon next Wednesday. So if anyone's in that area, check out the news
Yep.
page on the BemaDiscipleship.com website and you'll find out exactly where and when I'll be. Your light just got amazing, Marty.
I know. It's because I turned it on. How about that?
We have more people from Missouri. Astronaut Mike Dexter. What a name that is.
Yeah, that's an astronaut name. That's it.
We've got Louisiana, we've got Virginia. It looks like it's working all over the country, Marty. We'll find out about
Wonderful.
international later, but we're. Oh, and actually, Joseph from Virginia is on Twitter. So we have all the platforms represented at this point. We are
Okay.
successfully streaming everywhere.
Okay. Excellent. Well, we always talk about where our next Q&A is going to be. We're going to skip June. We're going to take June off, everybody. I'm in Turkey, and then I'm doing a team leader conference, and yeah, Baymont team's just going to take June off. We get to do that every now and then. We're going to do that. So no Q&A in June. And then Reed was supposed to be up in July. Like it was going to be, but then I found out he's on sabbatical. So we're not going to do that to him. So I'll come back in June. I'll probably come back in August. And then I'm going to see if I can't talk Reed into a September Q&A. See if we can get him when he's back in the office. So that's our next Q&A will be Thursday, July 18th. July 1/8, 2024. It's a Thursday evening. What day is it today? Thursday evening. Be just like this. Same
Just like
bat
this.
time, same bat day of the week. Man, allergies here are killing me today. My eyes, whoo! Ohio. I don't know what happened. It rained yesterday. Must have kicked up some stuff. I don't know, but whoo, man, my whole family is bad.
Now, Marty, Doreen is begging me to answer a question. I'm assuming that that is a reply to some other comment on Facebook, and I have no idea which one she's replying to. Possibly Brian's question about whether or not the cup that you're using now is the only cup you own. And no, of course, it is not the only cup he owns, but it is the only cup approved for streaming and podcasting. It is a nice, quiet cup that works so perfectly. And I don't
It's
know
a
about
quiet
everybody
cup when
else.
I it's a quiet cup when I set it down on the desk. But
Yeah.
oh, how loud it is. Look at that. Mm.
I don't know about you, Marty, but my calendar got flooded today with events for the coming
Oh, I put
fall.
that on the work calendar, didn't I? Oh no. Yeah, I should probably change that to my personal calendar. I put all the Bengals games on the work calendar. Oh no. Oh, goodness gracious. How wonderful.
Uh, yes,
How
it was
splendid.
great.
Well, that's fun.
Oh, I was wrong about Doreen. She actually wanted to know if she can buy an I Survived Weimar, Israel, and Turkey shirt, which I don't
Yeah,
know, maybe someday.
we don't make those yet. All right, I'm going to get into this. We got plenty of questions today. We got lots.
We do.
We're going to try to sprinkle in the live questions as we go. I'm going to try to move quickly. I think I can generally, I'm committed. We can do this. We're going to try to get some of the live stuff like we've been doing. And we got a great rapid fire response section tonight. So we'll be ready to get to that. We're going to take care of a lot of these questions by putting them in that one. A lot of ones that I can answer quickly. So we'll do that. But I'm going to start here. This is a rough one to start with. Not rough, just a whew. Elena wrote in with a doozy. She had this question that was just burning for an answer, and so we're putting it on the Q&A. Elena, I'm a Bible student and a teacher with an organization. I've been teaching Pardes. I already know when I see that, I already know where this is headed, and I've read it already, but I knew where it was headed when we got into this. Been teaching Pardes, using it to interpret parables. Recently, some history behind Pardes was brought to my attention, and I can't shake the burden of this. I know the caveats that Marty mentioned in the introduction to the method, but what was brought to my attention was Moses de Leon's widow allegedly claiming that everything he wrote about Pardes was made up, including the fact that Jesus and his disciples would have used the same principles in order to get scholarly attention. I know, of course, Pardes didn't exist in Jesus' time, but Marty says that though they didn't have a name for it, the very core ideas of Pardes would have been taught and used rabbinically. I was wondering if you have ever had anyone bring this up, and how do you answer this issue? I love using Pardes, but want to be sure that it is, in fact, what people would have been using in Jesus' day to interpret his parables. I've tried looking for myself, but I can't seem to find anything. Please help, Elena says. So, yes, Elena, this is not... what's been handed to you is a very ungenerous framing of a critical a helpful critical conversation. I think the conversation of the widow and that's probably like not the greatest scholarly critique of Pardes. Now, we did give the caveats. It kind of sounds like perhaps you may have listened to the addendum video. I will just tell everybody, no matter what you're doing, any episode that you are at all intrigued by using, studying more, I'm begging everybody, make sure you look at the show notes, because there are links, there are videos. Sometimes I will do something and I'll want to circle back and correct something, and there will be like an addendum video where I'm like, hey, this is one of the most important addendum videos that I've made. And it sounds like maybe you have actually found that and watched it, Elena. If not, make sure you watch that. Because we kind of go deeper into those caveats and all of those things. In that addendum video, in the description, I link a teaching from my teacher, Ray, talking about these same principles. To use Pardes very directly as a mechanic would be to overplay the historical hand. It was not a construct that Jesus and his disciples. That is a fair critique. I think there were times where some people used Pardes, and I'm going to leave the names of Moses de Leon. I'm not going to credit. I think the way that people frame that, as if he's the creator of Pardes, as if he's the only sole person that's ever discussed these principles, and he's the one that introduced it to us. And we've all gone back to, I think that's just a very straw man. I never even heard the name until a year or two ago. Like I wasn't getting any of my material from that source at all. And I know that a lot of his stuff deeply shaped conversation. But anybody that claimed that Jesus' disciples would have specifically like talked about those mechanics, they didn't. They didn't. That mechanic was not created, and it was a construct that was made to discuss these hermeneutics in the classical era, about 1000 AD. But the principles are simply have been a part of rabbinic teaching since the Second Temple period. So like we would say Mishnaic Judaism, pre-Talmud. We know that because these principles are at play in Mishnah, in Talmud. They are discussed in a Talmudic era. I know Dwight Pryor, who would be a much more reputable scholar. He would at least be on the level of my teacher, Ray. Probably, I don't know, maybe even more respected academically. I don't know, maybe more vetted, or however you want to, peer-reviewed. Dwight Pryor gave many lectures. He preferred to use the language. He wanted to stay away from Pardes, and he used the language of Keshers, which I have found that a lot more, I don't know if I would say scholarly conversation will use Kesher over Pardes. Completely understand why. I like Pardes because of its ability to teach beyond just allusion. The thing we know that rabbis are doing is alluding to ancient Hebraic text. So they're alluding to the Hebrew scriptures. They're alluding, and we call that remez, and then the other side of that allusion is what we would call drash. So I love the Pardes package because of how it teaches us Peshat, which is discussed absolutely everywhere. That's discussed everywhere. Peshat, it just means surface, like this surface level reading. So that like there's no discussion that Peshat is like a thing rampant all throughout rabbinic understanding and conversation. The question is like remez, drash, that particular language. I like it because of its ability to teach me the mechanic. You just have to hold the mechanic loosely and remind yourself that Peter and John and James wouldn't have talked about Pardes. They wouldn't have said, what's the remez? Like that's not the language they would have used. It's helpful for us as Westerners because it helps us access an Eastern way of thinking. But they were just doing this. It was the water they were swimming in. They weren't even thinking about it. They were just doing remez and drash because it's how so 1,000 years later, in a westernized world, far after Judaism's been Hellenized, they come up with a construct to teach these mechanics, and you get Pardes. That's why I feel like the construct is helpful. Obviously, you can tell why so many people are like, I just want to stay away from that. It's connected to Jewish mysticism. It's connected to this kind of critique. It's connected. So if we just stay away from it, that's fine. And maybe a lot of those other people that have chosen to stay away from Pardes, I hold it with loose hands. I like the language. I love the handles. I like the package. I find it very helpful. But the actual construct itself would not have been a part of the day of Jesus or his disciples. So an excellent question. Make sure you watch those addendum videos. Make sure you check out show notes. All the goodies. It's a good critique. It's just, I think that critique as it's been framed to you is a straw man fallacy. It's been taken too far. It's a very ungenerous rendering. There's no room. It's just like this complete write-off. And I just think that's foolish. I just think it's foolishness. There's far more going on. There's far more nuance. And because of the nuance, some people are not going to want to use the language of Pardes. That, like I said, maybe that's the wise move. Jay, I'm just going to say Jay because of the nature of the question. We won't be saying names. I'm going through all the episodes as I'm reading the Bible. In episode 46, Song of Sexuality, you say something about the imperial taking a toll on life. I have a lot of questions about that because I'm suffering. Would love to have a deeper understanding about that. Yeah, it's a great question. I get asked a lot about that episode. I say a lot of things that I was not prepared and am not prepared to dive deeper on. It's a category and a subject and a topic that you just don't make mistakes in the evangelical world. You make a couple mistakes there and that's it. Your career is done. So whether that's good, bad, or, indifferent, whatever. It's just something that I've been very careful about. What do I say? How do I say it? But I love your question. When I made those comments in episode 46, part of what I was saying is I just think it would be more helpful for us as we struggle with this. We have attached sexual sin, sexual struggle of any kind, to shame. It's such a shame-laden discussion. And one of my points was, I don't feel like we've been honest. I don't feel like we've been honest with somewhere. I mean, I don't know if it's too simple to just say the Industrial Revolution. Somewhere our Western world, Western civilization changed, and our civilization began to order itself around productivity. Productivity as it pertained to commerce, the economy, and not all that. I'm not even saying all that's wrong. I'm saying our worldview began to get attacked. So we started structuring everything: education, life stages, all the things we go through, everything about how we do relationships, marriage, and all the things that come with it, like sex. All those things get tied to a particular line of human development that in our cultural context follows a particular, and because of that, because of our education systems, because of the way that society ordered itself, because you are in high school until you're 18 and then you go to college, and it's just as we have given ourselves more and more and more to that westernized world, we keep pushing the date where we would pursue those kinds of relationships that would lead to sexual union. We keep pushing those relationships later and later, and that's fine. That's fine. But we ought to be honest about what we're doing. And a lot of that is connected to things that I would call idolatry. Like there's an idolatry problem when it comes to socio-political, the economic, like we're designing our whole world around production and the dollar, and how to grow industry, how to grow market value, and because of that, this is when you graduate, this is what you do next, this is when you get married, this is how, and it all gets tied to everything else: generational wealth, mortgages, wages, and it all affects how we, and so here we are as human beings, designed by God with some kind of biological development, some kind of biological clock. And because of the way we have ordered the world and ordered society, we keep separating ourselves further and further and further from this biological design, biological reality, whatever language feels best for you. And we just haven't been honest about it. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm certainly not saying, please don't hear me say, I'm not trying to make some wacky, weird case that we should all be getting married when we go through puberty like they used to 3,000 years ago in another culture somewhere else. We don't live in that culture. We live in this culture, and that matters. So I'm not trying to say we should be going back to something else. I'm just saying we ought to be honest about the world that we live in. And I don't think we've been honest about that and how it's pertained to relationships, marriage, sexuality, all those kinds of things. We have put ourselves in a situation where we've got to be somewhat intentional. We've got to be somewhat resolute, vigilant in how we relate to things like our sexuality. And we can't talk about it. We don't talk about it. We don't deal with it. And especially in faith circles. So we just shame people for it. And so you take the shame and the disconnect and our idolatry to whatever you want to call it, and it just keeps compounding and compounding and compounding the issue. So I think in the episode I talked about, like, my son or my daughter, like I would want them to know the world has gone this particular direction, and it means that the deck is stacked against you. So if you're growing and if you're developing and if you're establishing relationships and you feel like, golly, this is really, really difficult, just know that the answer to that is yes. Yeah, it is. It is. And maybe not. I don't even know what the right language is. Maybe it wasn't designed to be this way. And it's neither right nor wrong. But the world we live in, this is this is hard. And we have a lot of tools to help us make it, and we can make the right decisions. But I just don't think we just shame people as if this is just like, just do this, just make that decision, just left or right. And we're not honest about, you're heading out into a chaotic mess. And so that's part of what I was getting at, Jay. Hopefully that's a little bit of a decent expansion on that. Hans, I think is how I'm going to say that. Who knows? I'm guessing. Hans says in episode 74, the slide deck shows the order of learning going from Bet Sefer to Bet Midrash and then to Bet Talmud. And then he links our slide from episode 74, our slide deck. However, I've seen elsewhere online that the order of the last two are reversed, and here's one example. Can you comment on this? I can. And I did in the episode. I said they'll flip these orders around. You'll find, I actually told you will find, and a lot of people actually do flip it. They're probably even right. Here's the problem, and here's why we don't know what order to put it in. Because we don't have a lot of written records of how this process, how that educational system. We know a lot about Bet Sefer because of how it's written about. Historical evidence abounds. What we don't have a lot of evidence for, and a lot of rabbinical conversation about, what we know much less about Beit Midrash, Beit Talmud. How exactly did it function? Which was which? It seems like when you encounter conversation that perhaps it's just kind of like this messy, like you can't tell, are they talking about kind of like both stages in one? Are they calling the whole thing Bet Talmud? Are they calling the whole thing Beit Midrash? Like which one's which? And as I look at the meaning of the terms, I feel like the way that it was, I think you linked Steve Korn's website there, makes total sense. He's probably right. I think there's far more people that have outlined it the way that Steve has versus the way that I have. I think I've even outlined it differently than my teacher did, simply because I don't think we have enough evidence to know exactly how it functioned. And the reference to Beit Midrash and Beit Talmud, to me, they feel like they're in the wrong order. I could be wrong. I could simply be wrong. And so if you were going to teach this and you wanted to flip the order, I'd feel free. I don't think, we just don't know enough that it's going to, I want to say matter. It matters. I just don't think we know enough to be able to say we know one way or another. It's too squishy. And so, yeah, you'll find that. And I think I've even debated, Hans, I've debated actually changing it myself. And I may change it when we get to a spot where we re-record that episode. I may actually flip it, because as I've interacted with material, I have seen what you're linking here from Steve's website. I've seen that far more than the other. So I think part of me, I think my insecure me just says, I probably have that wrong. It seems like everybody else sees it this way. But on the flip side, I think most of us are ordering that way because we're all working kind of off of the same conversation. It's been ordered that way before, and we're just kind of mimicking and following suit. So I don't think it's built off of like this deep scholarly, this is what the evidence points to. So do with that what you will. We don't know exactly which order they go in and which pieces go with which section. We have a general understanding of how the movement worked. We're very confident about Bet Sefer and where it landed. We got that right. What we don't know a lot about is exactly what was Beit Midrash, exactly what was Beit Talmud, and when did those exist. Another great critique would be, well, similar to Pardes, a great critique would be, well, some of this stuff doesn't exist until later, Marty. And that, I mean, in a lot of ways, that's true. And yet we also know that there are lots of rabbis that are doing what Jesus is doing. Jesus isn't the only, so the principles are there. This is the name of the game, by the way, Elena and Hans. This is the name of the game for so much of Second Temple Jewish history. Pre-Talmud history is so messy because it's not until the Mishnah and the Talmudic period where all of a sudden stuff starts getting written down, codified, canonized. You start to get a whole lot better, cleaner records, written record. at that point. So there you go. Hold on. Okay. I know Brent will throw in live questions if he's got any, but I'm going to keep moving because I don't see any. Candace says, I'm listening to episode 12 where Marty follows up about circumcision and mentions that Egyptians also practice circumcision. Something popped in my head, a big what if. God is an intentional God and there's no accidents or coincidences. What if this is so Moses would have a smooth path and be accepted as one of their own? I don't know. It's a big what if. It's a good thought, Candace. I love how you're thinking contextually. I love how you're trying to connect dots and thinking about how it impacts the text. And on one level, you could be right. Part of the question is going to be, again, how much do we know and not know about Egypt, Egyptian history, how circumcision relates to that history? Was circumcision the same thing? Was it used? I think the circumcision I was discussing in episode 12 related far more to the days of Abraham. So is that still the case 200, 300, 400 years later? It's a long time. Is their practice with circumcision, is it the same throughout? Is that the case when Moses is there? Even if it is the case when Moses is there, in the Egyptian usage, circumcision was for priests, and it was something that they underwent when they entered the priesthood much later in life. So to find a baby in a basket, I don't think necessarily it would have been a smooth reception where they've been like, oh yes, there's circumcision, that's fine. If they are in a world of circumcision, Egyptian circumcision, I don't think what they're seeing in the Hebraic culture is this great overlap. If anything, maybe, you could be right, Candace, you could be right. It's also possible that it's actually a huge offensive affront because what you're saying is, well, I'm priesthood, and I'm not even an Egyptian, and I'm priesthood in their context. So it could actually be potentially make it a rougher road for Moses and others. Here's a live question from Bill. Have you compiled a Bema vocabulary list? I run a small group, and it would be really useful for onboarding new folks who just join up. Do you mean, Bill, like a glossary? Because indeed, we have one. Here's Brent Billings with more.
Yeah, so here is the BAMA website. This is the subscribe page. And if you go to the bottom, there's an FAQ there. The second one is going to give you the list of compiled resources. That is basically everything from the show notes. So this list basically doesn't have anything else that you're not already going to find in the show notes, except for one thing, and that is this glossary. At the very top of the list of compiled resources is this glossary, which we have not linked from anywhere else up to this point. But now that we have completed the transcripts pretty much through the end of session 5, we will probably find a more prominent way to link this. But you can find it. It is linked from there. I will drop that page into the comments right now, although Bill is coming to us from Twitter, and Twitter will not get these links. So I'm sharing this page so that you can find it. But if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, the link should be appearing momentarily. So we do have that list.
Yes. And just so people know, when you get into that glossary, transliteration is a funky thing. Transliteration is the art of taking the phonetic word of another language and trying to represent that phonetic language, that phonetic word expression in the English alphabet. And so there's no right way to transliterate, I didn't say translate, transliterate a word. Some will argue I will argue there are better ways to transliterate words than others. There's more right and less right ways to do it, but there's no one right way to do it. And you'll find everybody has different, the CH versus the KH, the K's versus the Q's versus the C's. People will just do all kinds of different things, vowels, all that kind of stuff. So it's not a fixed science. So it's just the way that we've got some quirky, Marty's just got some quirky ways that I like to transliterate stuff. I like to use apostrophes. Brent has always been along for the ride and kind of appreciated what I do and the way I do it. And then we've all discovered that a lot of people don't do the same thing the same way. And we hold our guns. That's what we do.
Now, the second part of Bill's question, I run a small group and it would be useful for onboarding new folks who join up. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend dropping this list in somebody's lap because this is going to be terms that we are discussing throughout the entire podcast, and there's a lot of stuff there, and I think it might end up being more questions than you're ready to try to answer for somebody who's like 5 episodes into the podcast. But a useful resource if you're like, now I know they said something about this, and I feel like the term was something like this, but I have no idea where they said it, and this can help you find that. So I don't know.
Yep.
Obviously, you can do whatever you want with it, but I don't know that I would necessarily recommend it for new people who are just getting started in the podcast. But it is
Yep.
there if you need it.
Yep. All right, I'm going to keep going. We got a lot of ground to cover. Here I go. I'm going to get into Lori's question. Lori is the sister of Garrett. Garrett, who both Brent and I have met of recent from the Seattle area. And wonderful time in Seattle a couple weeks ago. Garrett shared this podcast with her. Generally speaking, I loathe podcasts, but this one is phenomenal. Yes, I'll take it. I've shared it with numerous people of different faiths, and they all agree. The explanation of the literary devices like chiasm and Hebrew words in the Jewish tradition, mind-blowing and life-changing. Thank you. I'm still in the early episodes, and a couple questions are swirling in my mind. Avram calling his wife his sister. She would have been old. All caps. She would have been old, Lori said at this time. Is Avram trying to advertise her as an unmarried virgin? Why would anyone want her? Why would Pharaoh want this old lady for a wife? And are we to believe that Pharaoh was gentlemanly and did not summon her to his bed? I don't think we're supposed to think that. I'm not saying that anything did happen, but I don't think we're supposed to think that something didn't happen either, Lori. So I think you're spot on there. Was something going to happen and didn't happen? Maybe. Who knows? Lots of Jewish tradition that talks about that, and a lot of the tradition says it didn't. Almost did, but didn't. I'm skeptical. Yeah, it makes sense. Any chance you would point me to some explanations for these questions? Thanks so much. Keep coming. So one of the resources, whenever you've got questions about a female character in Torah especially, I love the Jewish Women's Archive, jwa.org. It's this wonderful archive, and you can use the search function up in the top, and you can search for a character. In this case, I like to search for Sarai instead of Sarah, because I'm looking for that early version, those early stories of Sarai. And I search, and a bunch of stuff comes up. And one of the articles you will often find with a female character in the Jewish Women's Archive is you will find them talking about where does this character show up in the Midrash and the Agadah. Agadah is another form of Jewish Midrash. And it's always like the most fun article to read. And so I think Brent has a link, and he'll throw that for those of you that aren't on Twitter. He'll throw that in the comments. You can find that. The rest of you, I just described how you can get there and find it. Search for Sarai as a Jewish Women's Archive, and it's like the 4th entry down. It'll say Sarah, Midrash, and Agadah. And you'll read all kinds of amazing stuff in there, Lori, about just lore and tradition and Midrash, and some of it's crazy and some of it. But she is considered, as that article will tell you, there are these 4 women that are like in the Midrash, 4 of the most beautiful women in the history of the world. Esther is one of them. Was Ruth one of them, I believe? Sarah is one of them. Eve was, in a lot of those traditions, the most beautiful woman ever. And again, when I'm saying this, I think L. Grover Fricks always hates this part of the Midrash because she always assumes that the patriarchal rabbinical conversation is being whatever you want to say, sexist, but I think what the rabbis are often doing is not speaking purely about a material physical, sexualized beauty. I think they're actually speaking about something that's far bigger, far wider, transcends, and they're making some greater point. And I think you'll find that in that article. There's all kinds of fun stuff in that article about who Sarah was and why. I mean, Sarah's the chief. Isn't she considered to be the chief prophetess in all of Judaism? So check out that article. All kinds of fun stuff in there about her beauty, because the answer in Jewish tradition, and again, is Jewish tradition scripture? No, it's not. But if you want the Jewish wisdom tradition's answer to your question, they would say, was Sarah that beautiful? And they would say yes. And in fact, it was not just a material beauty. There was a beauty that transcended material beauty. And that's what makes these women so, again, when I use the word attractive, I'm not using it in a sexualized way. There was something that drew them to people, like the whole lore surrounding Esther isn't a sexualized lore. The king actually chooses Esther in so much of that tradition because there's so much about her that's attractive beyond sexual desire. There is that, but there's so many other, the intelligence, the wisdom, the hokmah, there's all this stuff that's entwined there, and Sarah has that, and so their answer would be yes. Actually, I don't know if they're right, but that would be their answer. Meg has a live question. I'm so enjoying the Bema podcast. I'm in session 3 and have gone through the Gospels. I'd love to know if you have any source material for your take on the Gospel of John. We're also going to have this. I think, Meg, actually, you have a question that was in I think you're the one that has the question later in my document. So I think I'm going to answer this again, and I think it's your question. I think that name rings a bell. But yes, Meg, so we go through John verse by verse in session 6. So just keep hanging in there. You'll get there. We're going to go through the entire Gospel of John. And along the way, we're going to talk about resources. And there's going to be one resource in particular that we use, which is called Interpreting the Gospel of John or something like that by Dr. Gary Burge. Can you find that link, Brent, and tell me what the title of that was? Was it Interpreting the Gospel of John? I think it was something like that. It will be the key text that we use. And then at the very end of that series of verse by verse through John, we will actually interview Dr. Burge on the podcast. It's one of my favorite interviews that we did, because it was just like Nerd City, where we just nerding out over the Gospel of John and all kinds of stuff. So Brent, what do you got?
You're correct on the title, and that is episode 252, where we start that series, and the book is linked from that episode. But we kind of go through what we're using the book for, and then especially we come back around. We not only do we interview Dr. Burge, but we have a couple of like meta conversations about our study on John at the end as well. So if you want to know John, we're going to give you a ton of stuff in that series.
That's right. We're going to give you what you're looking for. There you go. Okay. I may circle back around to some of the other points you asked in your pre-submitted question too, Meg. So I sure hope it's the same name. I'm almost positive it is. We'll find out. Joseph said, I'm currently looking into something I hear a lot of preachers talk about, namely that David was a man after God's own heart. It seems that there are 2 references, 1 Samuel 13:14, and Acts 13:22. that point to this idea. The Acts reference seems to loosely line up with what 1 Samuel says, but it is the only thing I could find that would match. Is Paul taking this from another place in the Bible that I'm missing? I don't think so. But I mean, 1 Samuel 13:14 is pretty close to a verbatim quote there in a reference to David. So I think that's where that idea comes from. Now, what intrigues me is your last part of this question, your last paragraph. So I don't think there's some other reference. I don't think there's necessarily anything more. It's a bigger idea than just 1 Samuel 13:14. I think the whole understanding of David is that the thing that made David unique, notice where this is at 1 Samuel 13, at the right before we're like introduced to who David is and David and Goliath, and it's before that, right? So there's this call about God wanting a man after his own, a man who's pursuing his heart. And David is that contrast to Saul. David is this, the idea here is that David wants the upside down kingdom of God. And he's going to pursue the upside down kingdom of God in upside down ways. He's going to pursue the kingdom with kingdom methods. And it makes him unbelievably unique in that regard. But hold on, because your next part of your question is excellent. My reason for asking is I always hear this as a qualifying statement for David, no matter what else is going on in David's life. For example, David numbered the people of Israel and got many of them slaughtered, but he was a man after God's own heart. Was David still considered by God to be a man after his own heart during the latter part of his reign when he clearly fell away from God? If so, why? And I think we often frame David in a very, very positive, almost like David can do no wrong. And it's clear in the story of David that David does all kinds of wrong. That David is punished for doing wrong, that David's life falls apart. And this line, a man after God's own heart, doesn't follow him all. God's not saying that this is all okay, because actually we see the fall of David. And if it's not for God's promise that he makes to the house of David, who knows what that would have been about, because David kind of becomes a mess all over the place. And so this idea that David is kind of untouchable because he was a man after God. David was a murderous adulterer. Not that you can't be forgiven about. It's one of the great stories of David. You can be forgiven about that. But there's, like, we would have today legitimate conversations about whether or not a person like David should still be in leadership after doing something like adultery and then murder and having his hands. I mean, God tells him he can't build his house. His hands are covered in blood, not just the blood of war, the blood of Uriah. And their world's not our world. And we have to remember that. Their world's different in a lot of ways. And doesn't mean that it's okay. It just means David was a mess sometimes. David also was this brilliant, he had these moments. And it wasn't just the beginning of his life he was brilliant, and the end of his life he was horrible. Maybe the beginning of his life was a little bit stronger than, I don't know. But David was a complex, nuanced human being, just like you and just like me. And we have our great moments and our bad moments and our good seasons and our bad seasons. And David was kind of a mess. The thing that was beautiful about David as a leader, as a king, David was a king. Like, we talk about the Davidic kingdom. And yet the thing that makes him so beautiful as a king was he wasn't the world's kind of king. He was kind of backwards. He was upside down. He was always doing, like, nobody got it, because he was using kingdom metrics. But that didn't necessarily follow him all the time. And so David shouldn't get a free pass. David's not supposed to get a free pass. Bruce Feiler wrote a book where he really got into, as a Jew, he's a secular Jew today, but he was raised in a Jewish faith. And he talked about his grappling with David. I think it's in Where God Was Born. I've read all of his books, so I get them all kind of mixed up. But I think Where God Was Born is the book where Bruce Feiler talks about David's a problematic character. And if we've been paying attention, we're like, yeah, absolutely. So totally with you. Man after God's own heart, yes. I don't think you're missing anything. I think that's where Paul's grabbing that idea from in the book of Acts when he says that. Yeah, I think that's right. But the way that we sometimes use it as this blanket, and everything that David does is okay because he's a man, I think you're totally right in identifying that. And that's not great. I have been parsing some. This is coming from, I think it's a live comment from Irish. He says, I don't know what to do with that name. I'm sorry. I just assumed pronouns. I have been parsing Psalm 51 in Hebrew text, and his heart showed there too that he is after God. It's true. It's true. It's absolutely true. Like, part of the redemption of David's horrible moments is his ability. It's very Judah-esque. If you go back to the story of Genesis, when Judah and Tamar, I mean, David is a son of Judah, and the defining moment of Judah's life, Judah's a mess. Judah has all kinds of dark chapters. And yet when he gets confronted with his sin, he's not afraid to just do a full public confession and say he was absolutely wrong. And he steps out of a role of family leadership, and he appropriately honors and lifts up Tamar, who and maybe he doesn't take care of her and lift her up enough. We can argue that. But that was a defining mark of Judah, and why he's the messianic tribe is because he's willing to humble himself and confess and repent. And David was willing to do the same thing. Doesn't take away from the consequences of what he did, doesn't make his sin any less grievous or horrible. It just means that it's also a part of, we see his heart, even in those moments. It's a great point. It's a great point. Live question from Jordan. I've wondered about the remezes for Matthew 13, specifically the treasure in a field and the pearl of great value. I love what you do with them in the podcast. I wondered whether the remezes might come out of Parasha Chayei Sarah, referencing Abraham purchasing the field with the cave. I've wrestled with this. Yeah, Jordan, it's a great idea. Abraham's servant searching for a wife for Isaac, respectively. It's a great idea. I have not nailed it down where I'm like, man, that's it. But I think it's a great possibility. And if you were to teach that from a stage and I was listening, I would be like, that's juicy. I like that. I don't think that's necessarily a stretch. Not sure if it is the remez, to use Pardez language, but I love the connection. I love it. So there you go. I'm going to do Shane, and then we're going to do rapid fire response here. What has Shane got? Let's see here. I was reflecting on the weight and gravity of Resurrection Weekend. And as I was reading through each account, the role of Joseph of Arimathea. Ooh, you're going to get me going here. Be careful, Shane. And the story continued to stick out. Clearly, he must play an important role. If every gospel account mentions him as being the one that actually approached Pilate for the body of Jesus, in short amount of time I've been digging, my first question is that in the Luke account, the writer mentions that he was a member of the council, seems to go out of their way to mention that he was good and upright man, and then states that he was against the decision and actions of the rest of the council, going along the belief that Jesus' trial was an informal trial at the house of the high priest, and behind the backs of what seems like most of the Sanhedrin. Would this imply that Joseph may have actually been a Sadducee, or that he was a part of the Sanhedrin that didn't have a say in the matter? And there's more to his question, but I'll pause here to answer that. Shane, I think it's possible. I think it's more likely that he's a Pharisee. Remember that the Sanhedrin, the formal Sanhedrin, is a body of 70 leaders, half of them Sadducee and half of them Pharisee. We know that Nicodemus is a member of the Sanhedrin. We know that Nicodemus is a Pharisee. We know that Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea have a relationship. I would assume, based on not just that, but church tradition, church history, the Jewish context of where he's probably a Pharisee. I would expect if he was a Sadducee for the story to tell me that. And it doesn't. So I almost assume he's a member of the larger 70-member council, like Nicodemus. Both of them aren't necessarily on the same page with the rest of the Sanhedrin, and I think that's probably the body of 70. Obviously, there was the informal Sanhedrin that condemns Jesus and does all that stuff there. But I would generally think that the larger Sanhedrin at large, not that Nicodemus and Joseph are the only dissenters, but I bet public opinion was probably pretty, at this point in the story, not loving Jesus. And so, but I think that's who he is and where he's coming from. There's a whole thing I want to get lost in, but I'll be talking about that for 20 minutes. So I'm just going to resist the urge. All right. Secondly, I wanted to learn from his actions and what bringing kingdom might look like. I assumed that because he and Nicodemus in the John account was handling a dead body, that would have made him unclean. That is correct. So very, like, not just like unclean for a day, but unclean for a week, if I remember my Levitical code correctly. It's a big uncleanliness, a big impurification, and therefore unable to celebrate the Passover. That would be true if it was before the Passover, but remember, Passover has already happened, no matter how you slice and dice the details. Either Passover was Thursday night when Jesus had supper with his disciples, or Passover was Friday night. I think that it fell on Friday night, but in Second Temple Judaism, in a lot of Pharisaical circles, when Passover falls on Shabbat, I believe we have evidence that they usually did the Seder the night before. I think that's what's happening in this week. And I hate getting into this because everybody's like, well, actually, I think it happened on Wednesday and there's 3 days and 3 nights. And I just get lost in this like crazy nonsense. And it is to me crazy nonsense. So I think there's a Passover Seder on Thursday. I think the actual Passover day lands on Friday. But they're taking his body down technically on Passover, but they have already observed Passover. So uncleanliness in relation to Passover and the Seder isn't going to be an issue for Joseph or Nicodemus. But if it would have been before the Passover, you would be absolutely correct. When I was looking at what Torah says about uncleanliness laws in relation to touching a dead body and how it affected his ability to celebrate a holiday that God commanded them to celebrate, I stumbled across Numbers 9. It states that God commanded Moses to tell the Israelites that if they had become unclean because of a dead body, that they and their descendants had to celebrate the Passover, but they had to do it on the 14th day of the second month. I am unfamiliar with the Hebrew calendar, so I don't know how many days later that would have been. But I was wondering if this command and the day when Joseph and Nicodemus would have had to celebrate the Passover would have any connection to any of the events of Jesus' post-resurrection. Thank you for your time. It's a great question. It's a great awareness. If they would have been unclean and had to miss Passover because of their ceremonial uncleanliness, they would have celebrated what's called the second Passover. That is absolutely correct. I am really stretching here. I did not go back and check. I want to say it's 4 weeks. It's 4 weeks after. But I could be wrong about that because that doesn't make sense to me. Because if a woman was unclean because of her nida period, she would just be unclean again. I'd have to go back and check there. I can't remember if it's 2 weeks or 4 weeks or how that worked. But there is a second Passover that those who are ritually unclean celebrate then. So that would be the case. And there wouldn't be anything in the timeline in particular that would hit with Jesus's events post-resurrection. So I don't think they're having to do the second Passover anyway. But if they did, I think you have something the week after Passover for like that whole week. First fruits is going to be Sunday. The next 7 days, you'd get close, maybe. He's appearing to his disciples, and we're told he's teaching them for 40 days. Then you have the Great Commission, Shavuot, and Pentecost. I don't think there's anything specifically that would have landed on second Passover. I could be wrong. That's just a quick overview. So great question and good awareness, Shane. Really good awareness. So I love that. But it's time. It's 8:53. We're going to see how fast it takes us to do our rapid fire response section. And Brent, I just love our listeners. I love our listeners so much. We're about ready to find out why. Because I brought up a jingle last time. I was like, I feel like this is a segment of our live stream. And I feel like this segment needs theme music. And so I just sat here and I was like, rapid fire responses. And it was awesome, but it wasn't awesome enough.
It wasn't quite enough because somebody said, I can do one better. And they sent me this.
I can rapid fire responses. That's it, everybody. I like how can live stream now? I just want to come up with more segments and more theme music. Don't even know. Do we have credit? Who sent that in? Do we have credit for that?
Oh, I was trying to look it up earlier, and I'm actually using my phone as my camera right now. But let me see if I can find it. You can actually do Instagram on a browser now. So let me see if I can find it. But I'll let you get into the questions. Hopefully,
all right, here we go.
These are truly rapid fire responses, you can get through several of these before I even find who it was.
We're going to find out. We're going to do better with this rapid fire response section.
He's in the comments. He's watching. It's Caleb.
Yes. The Caleb I know, because it feels like a Caleb thing.
Caleb Klingon.
Okay. All right. I've seen that name before. Okay. I've seen that name before. I thought it sounded like a Caleb Colby kind of thing to do too. So I wasn't sure if it was going to be that.
That's true. Okay.
Caleb,
rapid fire questions. Let's do this, man. Let's do this.
All right. Quint says it's a live rapid fire question. I just wanted to give a shout out to session 2. I'm now in session 8, Isaiah portion. I did not skip it. I know you guys said a lot of people skipped it, but I thought it was great. Just finished the prophetic imagination. And I'm about to read Heschel. Yeah, you are. The prophets are so cool. Love the Bema crew. Love how it's making me explore the Bible more and more. I hope y'all comes through Arkansas. Arkansas, yeah. I need to get out to Arkansas. Yeah, totally. Love it. Thanks, Quint. And thanks for the kind words. It's awesome. I love to hear that stuff. It's honestly, like, those things don't go unnoticed. Let's see. Tamira. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I don't know. I would just be guessing on pronouns. I just listened to episode 9 about Avram and Lot. I'm a bit confused. If Avram was planning to give Lot back after he was captured, why did he go and save him? Great question. I don't think he was trying to give him back, planning on giving him back. I think he was planning on rescuing him. And I think, as I taught that in that episode, what I wanted to imply is it was the heart of the king that makes Avram go, oh, man, that's good. You know what? You're just going to get it all back. So I don't think his plan was to give Lot back, but the king's request and the king's heart changes his mind. Joan Sessa, I love that. In episode 164, Marty mentions the field of babies and what that entails. Is there evidence that people in the church rescued any of those babies? I know that I have been taught that there is. I have not run across a bunch of evidence yet. I've run across a couple of references. I don't know how much people are assuming. I know the letter of Diognetus talks about how they don't expose their children. They don't discard their children. So that's a reference to how Christians aren't engaging in the child exposure. But I have been taught that, and I don't know what the historical evidence is behind that. But I have been taught that Christians would find people that were children that were being exposed and rescue them. Do with that what you will. I'm not sure how great the evidence is for that. Tyler, our young adults group has started your lessons, and I wanted you to know I really appreciate you making it. I'm tired of people yelling in the church that we didn't come from no monkeys. And I appreciated your interpretation of Genesis 1. That's as far as we've gotten, but I liked your interpretation much more than a recipe for creation. Just wanted you to know that. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Tyler. I know for a lot of our college students, to be able to engage the Bible and not have to, I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong. I'm just saying to be able to engage the Bible and not have to set aside your, I had multiple students. My very first class of Bema, before it was a podcast, on a college campus, I had 4 or 5 students that were in evolutionary sciences. So their literal degree program is studying evolution and evolutionary science. And they said Bema's allowed me to essentially engage my faith while I still work in the lab every day. And I've always loved that. That should be something that we're able to engage and wrestle with. So thank you for your thank you. David says in episode 39, you say that the Israelites were sacrificing in Jerusalem. Was not Jerusalem at the time not in the possession of the Israelites, and was not until David conquered it during his time as a king? David, you're right. You just caught me. You caught me talking about Jerusalem when it wasn't Jerusalem yet. I'm just totally wrong. I was just totally wrong. So you are totally right about that. I suppose, and this is a part of history I'm so not good with. So I'm really insecure about this, but I would assume that this is when the tabernacle is at Shiloh. Is that correct? Right? Is there somewhere else it is? Like, I think there's a couple different places the tabernacle ends up through the Judges period, and then through Saul, and then eventually the tabernacle gets brought. I mean, that's a big part of the David story when the tabernacle, when he conquers Jerusalem, and then they're there, and then they bring the ark into Jerusalem. That's a big, so you are correct. Yes, it would not have been in Jerusalem. It would have been wherever the tabernacle, because the temple's not built yet. So wherever the tabernacle is, whether that was Shiloh or someone else. You are totally right. Dylan, I have to share that I finished Bema seasons 1 through 5. Woo! Thank you so much. The tools you have equipped me with are truly life-changing. I can't wait to dive into season 6 and beyond. I may re-listen to 1 through 5 as well. I'm forever grateful. Absolutely. Brent will always say, binge as fast as you can and catch up. And then once you get caught up, or as you're getting caught up or whatever, go back to those sections that you were like, that was a section I wanted to listen to again. That's a section I needed to learn more about. That's a section I want to dive deeper. And then do that. Elmer says there was a professor back in the 1970s before NT. Right. They became good friends, taught about the kingdom of God. That person was Gordon Fee. I have audited some of his classes. He did a teaching in 1983 at YWAM, which can be found on YouTube under the Kingdom of God series, part 1 of 4, The Nature of the Kingdom, Dr. Gordon Fee. Absolutely. And, Gordon, Dr. Fee is just one of those people he was like, yeah, he's with N.T. Wright. He's one of the grandfathers of this entire kind of movement. When I went to write my book, the knee-jerk, immediate go-to, because part of what you do in a book proposal is you find competitive titles, kind of like a mortgage. You're finding competitive houses to price against. And so you're looking for those, like, what kind of book is this? And the very first one on the list, without even thinking about it, was, I think, is Reading the Bible for All It's Worth, right? By Dr. Fee. So he was in this stream. He was clearing this road before I was even in the world. So absolutely, you're spot on. So true, Elmer. John says, I just listened to lesson 74, Silent Years Synagogue. I found your description of people gathered around a raised platform to hear a speaker speak particularly interesting. At any given time, the speaker would have had his back turned to half the audience, making the speaker difficult to hear. Okay, when I was reading this, I was like, okay, John, yeah. I am in no way a biblical scholar, but I seem to remember imagery, some given in the last session, about creatures that faced 4 directions at once. They have like 4 faces. I wonder what that type of imagery would say to a group of people that would be used to the above mentioned conditions. And John, I have no idea if they would connect those, but that is something I have never thought of before. And I freaking love it. So don't have anything to say about it, but that's a great question. Joseph, I just wanted to thank you for the podcast. I was an avid listener and have completely walked away from all teachings because of spiritual abuse. Your podcast gave me the freedom and confidence to walk away and take time to heal. Good. Bless God. I have been having the desire to learn or go back to church. Bless God. The first place I went back to was here, and I found the series on spiritual abuse. My family was wrecked by the church. My wife and girls rejected the teachings. The church demonstrated hypocrisy, greed, favoritism. They were exclusionary, and I believed you described it as a tribe or a team. If you are not with us, you are against us. Thank you for providing a space that creates a place of learning and questioning. Now I need to find a church that does the same thing. It's tough since they all go through Bible college and are taught the same way. It's tough since a ton of churches use fear as a tool. Amen and amen, Joseph. It is tough. I'm glad that you've been on the journey you're on. I'm glad you've made it to here. I'm glad you kept going. I'm glad you're still trying to keep going. I'm glad that you seem to have a sense that it is hard. It's unbelievably difficult to find a church that is, they're out there. There's hope. They're not necessarily easy to find, and who knows if there's one in your town. There probably is. Like, I feel like the Spirit of God is faithful on some level. Who knows where they're hiding? Who knows? Could be a house church, could be a crazy mainline church you've never even thought about darkening the door of. Could be a Catholic community. Who knows? But I feel like the Spirit of God is faithful, but it is hard. It is hard. And there's no quick answers. So stick with it and stay on the path. Bradley, I'm in session 4. I'm wanting to study Ruth in a deeper, more Bema fashion. Can you recommend any books? This is a rapid fire response. No. I don't have any Ruth resources. That's bad. Aleph Beta, how about that? Foreman has some drop dead awesome teaching on Ruth. So go to Aleph Beta and study anything that Foreman's got on Ruth. alephbeta.org. I'm sure Brent, if you're on the right platform, will drop a link in the chat. A lot of stuff you have to have a membership to view the larger courses, but you might be able to get a bunch of stuff for your free access. And then if you really wanted to, you're not going to go wrong with a $10 a month membership. Promise you that. Marty, your extraordinary insightful commentary on the gospel has been of great use to me. Thank you. Incidentally, your prose is razor sharp, which intensifies the impact of your message. Thank you, and God bless you. Mark, you have no idea how much that statement and encouragement means to me. I have to say, I can't say I agree with you. I feel like I'm like this Southern Idaho hillbilly, and I would just love. I'm actually gonna copy and paste this little statement here. I'm going to frame it and I'm going to send it to Reed Dent. because he likes to make fun of the way I talk, Mark. Can you believe that? Can you believe that, Mark? As somebody who has said that I have razor sharp prose, honestly, I put this in here because it actually means a lot to me, because I don't feel like that's me. There's Meg's question. I think I would answer it the same way, Meg. So since this is rapid fire response, I'm just going to keep on moving. My answer for that question was the same answer I gave you earlier. Same stuff. Chris, last rapid fire response. How we doing? 5 after the hour. We did okay. 10 minutes. Marty, I met you at Bridgeway. Oh yeah, I know you, Chris. I know you. He went to Turkey with one of the people that I know. I'm currently in session 4, finishing up Revelation. I'm wondering if you've listened to or read Dr. Shane Wood from Ozark University, who specializes in Revelation. He and Marty track really closely with their teaching in regards to Revelation. Shane studied under Dr. Robert Lowry at Lincoln Christian College, has done some good scholarship. His lectures give some links to his lectures. Here's the thing. So I got to meet Shane. I was aware of Shane just right before I got to meet him. But I got to meet Shane when we spoke together. We were the 2 keynote speakers at the Michigan Christian Convention together, which was awesome. It was like the coolest team. And that's right. I didn't get to talk a lot to Shane, but I got to talk a little bit. Got to get his book and his resources. There is a ton of overlap. Shane's using a very, very similar hermeneutic when it comes to Revelation. You are not going to go wrong. I'm going to start adding Shane's, Dr. Wood's, I just call him Shane like he's my buddy. I'm going to start adding Dr. Wood's material to our recommended Revelation resources. Because, and the cool thing about Dr. Wood is he's not coming from the same circle that I, like a lot of the teachers that I recommend, we all were influenced by, you know, Ray, or the people that Ray was influenced by. A lot of my teachers and a lot of the people we recommend are kind of in that circle. And so when you find somebody that's not in that circle at all, but still doing the same work, coming to the same conclusions, that's just something really special. And Dr. Wood is one of those people. So he's going to have a lot of stuff that we don't share on the podcast, but are coming from the same place, thinking the same thing, asking the same question. So yeah, that's great. So there you go, Brent. I think we should play the, well, unless you have a accreditation. What am I trying to say? A citation of who we give credit to.
Oh yeah, no, it's Caleb.
Oh yeah, we already did that. Okay, well then it's time to cue
Yeah.
the outro
Well, we
music.
can. Yeah, we're done. So we're gonna close it out the same way we started it.
I'm here
Caleb
for it.
actually, he followed up with another comment and said your voice was in key, and he didn't even have to auto tune you for that. So,
I
bravo.
have a response to that, but it includes a swear word, so I'm just going to say, absolutely, thank you. All right, there you go. Love it. I absolutely love it. And right after the rapid
Marty,
fire, yes.
I just, you don't have, like, Nickelback is not a swear word.
No, I wouldn't think it is.
I was
God's
trying to
music.
time that right to
God's
get you to
music is
spit
for
your drink
everybody.
out, but it didn't work.
Yeah, I know. Yep. No, it's good. It's good.
We're a little past the top of the hour, but
we are,
let's,
and it's the time where we always say thank you to all of you that, and this comes every time, and we always say we know it's top of the hour. This is what they always do, but we pause long enough to say yes, we always do this, and we mean it. We take this time because it's not just something we do. We do it because we mean it. We want to say thank you to everybody that helps support our work, financially gives gifts to Bema. You're making such a huge difference with a handful of people now. It's not just Marty. It's not just Brent. It's a team of people that's helping us do things well, do things better, support adding teachers to the team, hopefully just making content it's not getting any worse. Hopefully the content's getting better. It's getting more robust. It's getting more diverse. We're not trying to just add all this brand new stuff, but we're trying to add the right things in the right ways at the right times. We're trying to take the fact that so many of you write in. I mean, we've read some of the comments here about how much it means to you. We take
Speaking
that
of comments,
seriously.
Marty, I gotta
Yeah.
jump in. We're not done. We're done with rapid fire responses. We've got another hour of questions here. Everybody thinks that we're
Oh,
closing this
yeah.
thing down. We're not done yet.
We're not done yet. We're not done yet. This
We're
is
not
just
done.
this is the middle. This is right in the middle where we just say thank you. I got way more in the tank. Look at me. I look fresh. I got theme music. I got rapid fire response theme music. I'm ready to go. I'd do another 2 hours right now.
Adrenaline is just coursing.
Coursing through my veins. Thank you to everybody that gives to our ministry. Thank you guys a lot. It really means a lot. I'm ready to dive
Yeah,
back in. So here we go.
maybe we would stop saying thank you, but people keep being generous. Like every week, I get a new list of names, and I say thank you in various ways, and I'm so honored and blessed to be able to do that. And you guys make our work possible. So we have to stop for a moment
Yep.
and say thank you
Indeed.
because everyone continues to be so generous, and we love being a part of this community.
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay,
All
Marty,
right. We're
I
back.
I so hate to do this to you, but we've already gotten multiple people commenting on this. You probably already know what I'm going to bring up, but people want to know about the life psalm thing. I feel like I'm going to have to go back and edit this episode and just remove that entire section because this has haunted me
Uh
for
huh.
weeks already, and this
Uh huh.
most recent episode has made it even
Uh huh.
worse.
Yep.
But it comes from Shmuel Safrai, and I swear, when we do our new version of season one, it is going to be in that episode for sure. But
Absolutely.
if you want to get the full explanation from Marty that is everything that I remember Marty teaching me in class back in 2013 and that Elle remembers from class in that same time period, and I'm sure that we talked about it in discussion group in 2016 when that episode came out. I'm sure that all that stuff happened. Somehow it wasn't in the podcast. Whatever, but it's in episode 298. So if you're far enough into the podcast, you're like, "Oh yeah, you definitely talked about it in the podcast." We did eventually, but it just wasn't in those earlier episodes like I thought. But it's there, and yeah, it's there. 298. 298 will give you everything you want to know about it.
Yep.
I'm
We've had
so sorry
people
for everything.
we've had people find like all the other like half references and send us timestamped links and everything. Here's what I know. I was in Seattle, and people in Seattle, we were at a group, and there were all these people from different places. Like some people were podcast listeners, some people had been with there was alumni standing in the group. That had been like pre-podcast when we were just doing a class in Washington State. There were people that were had gone on trips with me. So everybody was different. Like some people had only listened to the podcast, and everybody was like, "We all know about Life Sum." So it had, and they all kind of. So here's what we know: we know that I taught about it in class for sure. We know that we talked about it in discussion groups when we were doing that at the beginning. So we didn't do it in episode 24, but we sure talked about it in discussion group. We know that I talk about it on most of my trips. It usually comes up when we're in Israel. So we know that happened. Somebody told me I mentioned it. I talked about it in two different YouTube videos. I talked about a day in the life of my spiritual practices, and there's an old version, like actually called a day in the life, and then there's another more recent. It's still a few years ago, but there's a more recent video where I talk about what I do as spiritual practices. I talk about it in there. Somebody said I talked about it in a discussion video. Um, every episode has a group resources video that's attached to
Hmm.
that. And they say I make at least one. They thought two references to it in group resource videos. So there you go. Did I talk about it in an early podcast? No, but I did everything but.
It's everywhere.
So there you
What
go.
I would love is to be able to find the a piece of written work from Shmuel Safai that I can link to
Yeah,
directly. And I found places where it might be, but I don't have access to those
yeah,
resources to actually verify what's in there. So I'm still
yeah,
working on that, but hopefully by the time we get back around to that episode, I'll have a direct resource that we can link. But
yeah. I
it's
know
all
that.
over the place. We've heard from so many people, and I just this is the new Abraham's genealogy, and it's all my fault.
Oh, yeah. Well, here we with no further ado,
All
I'm
right.
going to jump back into our questions. Barney says this: if an Old Testament believer genuinely got it, they had faith, they were genuine, they loved his word, what was their experience? Did they see answers to prayer? I think, yeah, in the same way that we see answers to prayer. They see miracles or healings in the same ways that we would see miracles or healings. Yeah, I, I would, I would think so. It's not transactional. So it's not because they were genuine, because they got it, then they got answers to prayer. Because they did this, then they got healing. It's not transactional, excuse me, in that regard. But I would say it's similar. The one thing that might be different about them and what we experience today would be a post resurrection experience of the Holy Spirit. And I can't even talk real intelligently for a super long time about what that even looks like. I just know that in New Testament theology, Gospels, Acts, and beyond, something happens post resurrection with how God's people experience and are empowered by the Holy Spirit. It's not an all or nothing. It's not that we are and they weren't. It's that we have something they didn't. I can't explain it any more than that. I mean, I probably could, but for now. So I'm not going to say it's exactly the same, but I would think, what was their experience? Like, your question is, what was their experience? I think it was similar to ours, similar to ours. Were their lives blessed in ways that they recognized that filled them with thanks and joy? Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is all over your text, and it's in your, I mean, there's a Psalm. Is it Psalm 19, Psalm 11? I have not seen the children of the righteous go hungry, is what the psalmist says, something like that. So yes, absolutely. Paul will tell the people of Lystra in the book of Acts. He will actually quote Psalms, and then he'll actually be quoting a midrash about the Psalm. And he talks about, this is the God that fills you with joy. So notice, Barney, he's telling that to pagan, Gentile, non-believers in Lystra. He's saying the joy you experience, the fruit of your labor, your fields, your vineyards, all that goodness, it comes from God. It comes from God. All he's doing is naming the source of the goodness. So it's not transactional. It's not because they're believers, or because they followed the law, or because they understood, like then they get, no. This is goodness. It rains on the righteous and the unrighteous. The realness of God is there for anybody who seeks and longs to follow after God. And so those experiences were so similar. I won't say they're exactly the same, but similar for sure. A related question, which would require a lot of words, for an Old Testament regular believer who is not a Levite or an official in any way, was his participation. What was his participation? What did he really do in congregating around the tabernacle, David's tabernacle, and or the temple? Well, all of those references you make there are very wildly different periods of history. The tabernacle, Davidic kingdom tabernacle, and then later Davidic kingdom, Solomonic kingdom temple. Those are going to be different points of history. However, you didn't go to the tabernacle like we think of church. Like the closest thing to like we think of church, we think of corporate worship as like a weekly practice. That's going to be synagogue, and that's going to show up a lot later in the story. So pre-synagogue, pre-exile, when you just have the temple, when you just have the synagogue, when you just have the tabernacle, like if you're the Israelites wandering through the desert, the tabernacle is literally in the middle of camp. Like you're kind of like all around it all the time. You don't go to the tabernacle every day. You don't go to the temple every day. You don't go to the tabernacle. Like when you get to the land of Canaan, when you get to the promised land, and they set up the tabernacle wherever it gets set up, Shiloh or wherever it is, you don't go there to worship every week. It's not a place. There is worship, cultic rites, psalms, liturgy you could go there, and you could go there every day to take part in the liturgy, but they wouldn't have gone there as a weekly practice. So it's really hard for us to get our brain around. So what would they have done? They would have And see, we don't have evidence that pre-Davidic, like Davidic kingdom and before that, that they really follow. We don't have evidence they even ate kosher, that they were following Levitical law, that they ever did a Sabbath year, a year of Jubilee. Like we don't have any evidence that they even knew what the law was and how to follow it. Some did, many didn't, maybe most didn't. And so we don't really know much of anything about how they lived. Here's what we can probably say with certainty. They farmed their fields, they lived in community, they were an agrarian society, which required a lot of interpersonal interaction, and a lot of their faith, if they were faithful, was baked into their day-to-day societal relationships and the way that they farmed and the way that they lived and the way that they bought and the way that they sold and the way that they gave birth and the way that it was baked into your day-to-day experience. The biggest thing I think they probably would have done is festivals, feasting. When those holidays rolled around, again, those holidays were connected to what? Their agrarian lifestyle. And so when the spring harvest came, you got together, you celebrated, you worshiped, you did go to the temple, you did go to the tabernacle. You did this 2 or 3 times a year. You're supposed to do it 3 times a year. You would go to the tabernacle, you would make that journey. So what did they do? They probably did that. That's probably what it looked like. Looked like living life together. We found a question. A question fell through the cracks somewhere, all the way from December of 2023. Somehow we missed it, fell behind the desk, and we found it. Uriel is the name. I'm probably not saying that correct. Can you please give me a reference for the 4 pillars of Hellenism? Education, healthcare, athletics, and entertainment. I'll start by saying this, Uriel. That packaging that I referred to is how I processed what Ray Vanderlaan taught me in Israel. I believe he taught it to me in that way. I'm pretty sure I can remember the bus ride. I think I could even pull up the recording where we're on the bus and Ray goes through the 4 pillars. And then throughout the sites, we would use those 4 pillars. He didn't necessarily present it in the same way or in the same presence of the body of work as I, but that there's part of that that's just simply me. And now that I am looking at this question, I'm realizing, Brent, that all the resources that I put in there are not the right resources, because Uriel is asking about the 4 pillars of Hellenism. And for some reason, when I was getting ready for this question earlier today, my brain was thinking the 5 sects of Judaism. And now I'm realizing I got the wrong list of resources. So the list of resources I was going to give you are not the right ones. Somebody has recommended, man, now I'm angry at myself because I did all this work to prepare for this and I prepared the wrong thing. Somebody sent me, I've been sent 2 or 3 books, and 2 of them haven't necessarily been fantastic resources on Hellenism. But somebody sent me a resource recently that was a really good resource on Hellenism, and I'm never going to remember the title. But it is hard to find resources on Hellenism that talk about Hellenism the way we talk about Hellenism on the podcast. That's framed a particular way from there's a lot of stuff that talks about Hellenism from a secular, historical, just perspective. But we're trying to talk about it from a biblical, faith-centered, spiritual formation, Jewish, Second Temple Judaism perspective. You can pick up an awful lot of pieces from things like Josephus. But as far as how it's been packaged in the podcast, I'm just frustrated that Brent is saying, we can follow up with them. Brian will get in touch if we have contact, if we can. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to dig up what that resource is. But if somebody's listening to this live stream and if they found anything that goes over Hellenism, particularly the 4 pillars, I think that's pretty unique language. So it's going to have to be something that talks about Hellenism. I was gonna actually there might be stuff on my bibliography. Where's Ben Casperson when we need him? Is he watching right now? He's read my whole bibliography. not my bibliography, the bibliography that was sent to me by my teacher that I'm only a third of the way through. Ben Casperson's read the whole thing. So Brent says he believes he's watching. So if there's anything on that bibliography that's helpful in that regard, he might be in the comments or he might send me a message. So yes, we can reach back out for sure if we think of anything. Live question from Taiwana. I don't know if I said that right, but if I did, that's an epic name. What is the rabbinical takeaway that we can glean from the way Jesus handled Judas? Oh, goodness gracious. By rabbinical takeaway, I'm assuming that you probably mean like, what can we just learn from the model that Jesus, sure, man. What's coming to, golly, Taiwan, you're killing me with that question. That's such a good question. I mean, I wish I knew what to do with the pre-betrayal interaction, where Jesus says things like, one of you is going to betray me. Woe to him who does that. Then there's a conversation about what you need to do. Go do quickly. Then he shows up and he says, Judas, you would betray, the Son of Man with a kiss. Such like, golly, just gravitas statements. But the thing that's coming to mind is in John's gospel, he hasn't been betrayed yet. And he's telling his disciples, particularly Philip. I can never remember if it's Philip or Thomas. I'm almost positive it's Philip. He's telling Philip, like, I'm showing you the way. I am the way and the truth and life. I'm showing you how to get to and part of what we said in our session 6 series is the way that Jesus is going to go to the cross. He's not just going to the cross so that we don't have to. He's going to the cross to show us how to. Jesus told us, if you want to follow me, pick up your cross and follow me. Jesus isn't trying to save us from our crosses. Like we always like, oh, Jesus went to the cross, so I didn't. Jesus took my place. I mean, there's some truth to being able to frame it that way. But in large parts, no. Jesus said, come with me to the cross. Take up your cross and follow me. I am showing you how to go to your crosses. And almost every single one of those disciples, there's only a few exceptions. Almost all of those disciples are going to go to their crosses. They're going to follow Jesus to suffering and death. And so I think of Stephen in the book of Acts. Here's Stephen as he gets stoned to death by an angry mob. And he doesn't fight back. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't run. He doesn't stick up for his rights. He doesn't file a complaint. Here's Jesus betrayed by his own disciple, wrongly accused, falsely accused. Everything about it is 100% dead wrong. Everything about it is dead wrong. Everything about it is dead wrong. And he says, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you how to do the gospel in flesh and blood. So follow me. I think that's what we don't fight back. And I'm not saying we become a doormat. Jesus wasn't a doormat. Like Jesus just didn't let people, like that wouldn't be an accurate way to frame what I'm saying. But Jesus also knew what it looked like to say, the gospel is faithful here. The gospel is faithful here. And I might be betrayed by some of my closest, best friends and disciples and students. And the gospel is faithful here. And I don't hold this against the people. I mean, what did Jesus spend so much of his ministry talking about? Forgiveness. I'm memorizing the Gospel of Luke right now. There's been 2 or 3 stories where Jesus is talking about forgiveness, and everybody's appalled. Like, who does this guy? The passage I'm memorizing this week. Those who were eating at the table with him said to themselves, "Who is this man who presumes to forgive sins?" Jesus says, "Me. I presume to forgive sins. Watch me do this." So here he is being betrayed. No passive aggression. I'm not saying he wasn't hurt. Golly, he had to have been hurt. But full of compassion, mercy, forgiveness. Hurt, probably not shocked. I think we could probably learn that. We'll be betrayed. Friends will let us down. We will probably let other people down, and So I think there are things there. I think that's a great question. Good grief. Sheesh. What? Yeah. Thank you for asking that question. Sure. All right. Let's get to some lighter fare. Let's hope Joshua has something that's, um, uh, yes, this will do. I wanted to ask you a question about Bible colleges. I've only attended churches. Everybody calm down as I read this question. Everybody calm down. We're not doing anything crazy. I have only attended churches on a regular basis led by pastors who do not have a traditional view of hell. Neither of them actually preached their beliefs, which were either annihilationism or universalism, but I became aware of them as I became more involved in the church. I have felt called into ministry for a long time, and I am an ordained minister, but I was diagnosed with a serious mental illness in my 20s. And I had let that, and I have let that stop me from pursuing it. But I'm coming to terms with the fact that I won't be content doing anything else, and I'm trying to take steps to go to a Bible college and then go on to be a preacher. Let me stop here halfway through your question and comment on that. Like, you've only been at churches and you became aware that the preachers, the pastors, the leaders of your church theologically didn't hold to a traditional view of hell. They held to a annihilationism, universalism. If they were from any kind of tradition that went to seminary, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, any kind of mainline seminary, any kind of liberal art education, that's going to be your standard experience. So I grew up in the Reformed Church. The Reformed Church was all led by ordained ministers, and to be ordained, it was required to go through seminary and complete a whole. And I was told by two different ordained clergy that when you are deep in seminary towards the end of your theological training, almost everybody is what they called a closet universalist or a annihilationist, but usually a universalist. Theologically speaking, when it comes to the doctrine of hell, that is actually your standard experience. What people struggle to do is to figure out how to translate that to the local ecclesiological body. I don't say, I'm not giving any commentary on whether or not that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's not crazy fringe. That's more standard. And here's why it's going to matter, because of the second part of your question. I was wondering if your team had any recommendations for an affordable Bible college for someone who does not have traditional beliefs about hell and much more liberal progressive view. The older I get, the more I'm realizing that a person's beliefs about eternal torment has the potential to seriously hinder their ability to understand what God is trying to show them concerning the redemption of the world. And I really want to take part in helping people drop this us versus them mentality in the church today. Amen, amen to that. I did a whole 5-part series on YouTube about soteriology. So I'll just say amen to the last part of your question. Not necessarily taking a stand on where I fall on the doctrine of hell. I'm just saying your point about what people believe about that matters for sure. Let me go back to your actual question, which is about Bible colleges. Do I have a recommendation of affordable Bible college? There are lots of affordable Bible colleges, and I have one recommendation I'm going to lay on you here in a moment. But let me just say, Bible colleges exist because of what I just described about liberal arts education, liberal arts universities, and seminaries. Bible colleges are Bible colleges because a more traditional, conservative, typically a more literal engagement with the scriptures, that kind of hermeneutic, said the education system, scholarship is going off they're going off a cliff, liberal cliff, and we're going to hold to a more traditional, more plain reading, more literal reading of the scriptures. So Bible colleges are generally almost always not going to hold the view that you have. I'm not saying there aren't. I'm sure there are probably some progressive, non-traditional Bible colleges out there. But generally, Bible colleges exist for the very reason of holding those traditional lines. Having said that, if you are the type of person, and I'm not sure you are based on your circumstances, maybe this is not the right situation for you. But if you're the kind of person that can go to an institution that does see things differently than you do, and you know that, and it's okay, and you're going there to, here's the beauty of Bible college. It is affordable. It's super affordable. It is usually smaller and more intimate. The relationships are usually phenomenal and fantastic. There are so many beautiful, wonderful things about Bible college. It will often not align with the kind of theology you're talking about. But if you can bring that theology with you, and if that theology is going to survive, and you can learn from others and do the work and not get everything, all your feathers ruffled because they think you're wrong, if you can just be mature and engage in that way, then that was, I mean, that was kind of my experience in different ways when I went to Bible college. I was never somebody that was like, I'm totally on board with everything I'm learning at Bible college. I was usually kind of a pain in their neck. I was always disagreeing with just about everything. Having said that, I would recommend my alma mater. You want an affordable Bible college, and the people that are teaching there now are not the same people that were teaching me 20 years ago. It's growing, it's changing, and it's changing again. Leadership's changing again right now as we speak. So who knows which direction it's going to head? It might take a right or a left. I don't know. I don't know the new president nearly as well as I knew the last one, but I really liked the last era that my alma mater was in. Boise Bible College is in Idaho. They don't do any online, so you'd have to be in person. They might be changing that, to be honest. I don't know. They might be changing to do some online stuff. But I didn't agree with my teachers and the institution's status quo theological line pretty much ever. Like, I disagreed for one reason when I was younger, and then halfway through my education, I disagreed for a completely different reason. And I pretty much always disagreed with them. But it was a wonderful place to learn. And it was very affordable, very, very affordable. And they were good people. And still to this day, they're good people. And still to this day, a lot of us don't agree on everything. Maybe most things. I don't know. But there's still beautiful connections and beautiful people. And Bible colleges are struggling. Maybe that's their own fault. I don't like to think so. The world's just changing, and the way we do college and university is changing. And that's going to be true for all of us in any part of the university world. So anyway, I don't know. Now I'm just rambling, but I would recommend Boise Bible College, not because they teach what I teach, not because they agree with me, because a lot of times they don't. But there's some great people there. We got a great Bema connection. Vance Russell teaches at Boise Bible College. Greek, teaches different New Testament classes. Great professor there. Man, does he teach Greek? Now I'm trying to remember. Yes, he teaches Greek. And just a bunch of other great connections that have been there. They have some leadership that's retiring, and who knows what's next, but I don't know. There are so many beautiful things, even if theology wasn't necessarily always one of them. I'll stop rambling about that. Let's see here. Live question from Dustin. Other than God, who gave John the Baptist his authority? Forgot the Hebrew word Jesus uses for authority, shmicha. It's not necessarily that Jesus uses it, but that would have been the word that they use, shmicha. But Jesus answers with the question, who gave John authority? But doesn't the rabbinic tradition state that two rabbis have to give authority? Indeed. And I have always asked that question myself, Dustin, and I don't particularly have a great answer. My theory is that he comes from an Essene, so that would have made him kind of rogue. I don't know if he would have cared. I don't know if John the Baptist cared about Pharisaic shmicha. Part of me thinks he was like, I don't care. I'm doing what God told me to do. I don't even know if John would have said, I have shmicha. I don't know if John would have cared. I don't care about shmicha. I'm doing what I'm called to do. So John comes from a more Essene, Pharisee-facing ministry, one might say, where Jesus comes from a more Pharisee-centric ministry approach. Like, their approaches are slightly different. Some maybe have even suggested Jesus comes from a Pharisee, Essene-facing. I don't know. Maybe that's going too far. Who knows? But I'm not sure if John cared. And maybe there is an answer. We just don't know it. Maybe John, he came from a priestly family. Does that make a difference? I mean, the difference is you're talking priestly, you're talking Essene, you're talking Sadducee, and you're not talking Pharisee. Those are different worlds, and so they don't necessarily care about each other's rules. And I don't know if Jesus cared, to be honest. I think it's kind of clever. I think it's clever when Jesus is trying to speak to a Pharisaical world. Like, that's who Jesus is working with. Jesus is a Pharisaically based ministry. He's working with the Pharisees for 3 years. He's trying to talk to them. And so it's kind of like this funny play on a wink, wink, kind of like, oh, you want shmicha? I got shmicha. So but I don't know for John. I don't know. It's a great question. Great live question. Threw me a curveball. Caleb. And Gerson has almost the exact same question as what I've been told. Marty mentioned in an earlier session 1 episode that he would go into... I cannot believe they have the same question. That's crazy. This is a crazy question to have the same question. But yes, I mentioned in an earlier session 1 episode that he would go into details about the passage in Genesis about a man leaving his father and mother to be joined to his wife. It was interesting because it was the opposite of the Beit Av, patriarchal practices of that time. Could you let me know where to find this? This passage is very close to home because I know someone, who's about to get married, and this verse is being abused to basically manipulate somebody. And yeah, totally. So I probably didn't teach on that because when I got to that spot, I might have alluded to it. I can't remember in session 4. But when I got to that spot, this is like one of my own personal hunches. I haven't learned this from my teacher, and I haven't learned it from any other rabbis, and I haven't learned it from anybody. This is literally one of my own personal hunches, which always makes me as nervous as all get out. And so I usually don't say it publicly by the time I get there because I'm like, I'm probably wrong. I'm probably a complete idiot. And who knows? So in Genesis, it says, you're talking about Adam and Eve, and then there's this parenthetical statements. Parenthetical might even be a later addition. It's why translators will often put something in parentheses that just feels like it doesn't fit, it doesn't flow, it's different, it's odd. Maybe manuscript evidence actually puts it in the mark. Who knows? Different reasons. But there's this parenthetical statement. For this reason, a man leaves his father and mother and cleaves to his wife. The problem is that's not how it works culturally. Culturally, in almost all the biblical cultures, we would say Old Testament, New Testament, Davidic kingdom, patriarchal period, Second Temple Judaism, like all those periods of history, all periods of biblical history, the woman leaves her household and lives in the father's household, the Beit Av. So the husband comes and gets the bride and takes her to be with him. And yet Genesis says, for this reason, a father leaves his father and comes this way. And it works for us in our like Western American or Western world context, because that's what we do. But it wasn't how the Bible operated. So it's like, what is the author of Genesis talking about? Because that's not how it works. Now, it could be that I'm just crazy. It could be that there's something totally obvious there, and I don't know that there was a period of history that I just haven't learned of, and that's what Genesis is doing. It could be that maybe I'm reading too much into that, and it's not actually talking about the leaving of the household. It's simply talking about the idea that a father or that a husband becomes their own leader when they get married. It could be a million things. Here's what I find interesting. We talk about the story of God as a wedding, as a great wedding banquet, right? Jesus coming back. Revelation says the church descended out of heaven like a bride. So it's a wedding. And I know that there's a lot of, and if you haven't gotten to session 4 yet, don't freak out. I know there's so many people out there that adhere to like rapture theology and some glad morning when this life is over, we're all going to get out of here. By the time you get to the end of Bema session 4, session 5, it's going to be real clear that we don't hold that view. We're not a rapture theology. We don't think we're leaving. This is the world that God created. This is the world that God's redeeming. This is where Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming down. We're not going out. Like there's one verse where we're caught up to meet Jesus in the air as Jesus is coming down. Heaven comes down in Revelation. This is the world that God's coming to, which means in that case, the husband, I don't know if he's leaving his father and mother. Obviously, God has no father and mother, but it's the one instance where the husband will come be with the bride. What I find interesting is that in Ephesians, this is where I would have made an allusion to it if I did, and I don't think I did. In Ephesians, Paul's talking about husbands and wives. He quotes Genesis, and then he says, this is a mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. And we just think it's like some poetic comment about marriage. I think he's talking about Genesis. He's like, this doesn't make any sense. This thing that was said in Genesis doesn't make any sense. It's not how we operate. But in Jesus, it makes more sense because this is what Jesus is going to do. It's a total hunch, Caleb. It's a total hunch. And I could be totally wrong. It always makes me nervous when I come up with my own unadulterated idea. So there you go. Doreen says that Lois Tverberg touches on that passage in one of her books, and she doesn't remember which one. Yeah. That'd be great if she had something to say about it. I would start to get interested. Bree says, I am currently listening to episode 3, Master the Beast, and wanted to ask your thoughts on the word desire. The word desire seems interesting to me if you deconstruct it to a prefix and a root word, to desire something, to attempt to bastardize one from the male parent of the animal. This seems to explain the tactics of Satan as the animal whose mission was to break the union between father and man, to desire Adam and Eve. Also, would the nakedness be that Adam and Eve were exclusively spirit beings with no flesh to be concerned with? The serpent was naked as he was fully flesh, acting on every desire, and told them of their nakedness too. I'll answer that one real quick and just say no. I think all Jewish perspective, I think the language there, I think all of those things would actually make the exact opposite argument of the pure physicality, the materiality of their creation, their corporal nature, more than just spirit and body, soul united together. I have so many notes from reading. She basically says, thank you. I love your thoughts about desiring. The idea you're rolling with, the case you're making, is based off of English etymology, which is great. On a poetic level, that's great. On a biblical level, that won't be the case when we're looking at the Hebrew, obviously, or biblical language at all. It is a clever play on the English word for desire. When you pull apart the etymology like that. Here's what I will say. Like, there might not be a linguistic connection to make in that regard, like you're making biblically speaking, as far as biblical hermeneutics and interpretation. But the point you're wrestling with is very much in line. There's a midrash that talks about part of what the serpent is doing. And again, not the serpent in its cursed snake form, but the serpent in its pre-curse human-like form. That part of what the serpent is doing is the serpent is trying to essentially make a move on Eve. He's trying to pull her away and break relationship, not necessarily with God, but with Adam. And so a lot of your thoughts here run very parallel to a lot of the points that are being made in rabbinic midrash. So I do love that. And very clever. Just remember that breaking that etymology apart as playing with the English word, which will just be a translation there. Heather says she's from Louisiana. Recently listened to episode, I was just in Louisiana, had a great time. Listened to episode 120 of session 3, Truth and Light, where you discuss the transfiguration of Jesus. My question, however, pertains to the temple tax and the relevance of Jesus's instruction on gaining the drachmas to pay for both Jesus and Peter. I am new to the idea of remez and finding scriptures that Jesus may be referencing, which leads me to ask your thoughts on this. Could Jesus be referencing Psalm 146, which is a fantastic psalm, by the way? Remez aside, it's just a wonderful psalm. I am a big fan of Psalm 146. Don't tell Reed. Apparently, I told people that I hated psalms, but it's one of my favorites. The psalmist begins in praise to the Lord, encourages others to put their trust in him alone and not in people. Verse 6, he's the maker of heaven and earth, the sea and everything in them. He remains faithful forever. He concludes the psalm with verses 7 through 10. God's care for the oppressed, the hungry, the prisoner, the blind, the foreigner, the widow. Would he be pointing out the greed of the temple for collecting for themselves instead of providing for the needs of the oppressed as originally intended? Also asking Peter to put out one line and miraculously finding 2 coins in the mouth of a fish could be a callback to the calling of Peter and the miraculous catch of fish. Peter's seen miracles of Jesus, obeyed him to see a catch big enough to break nets. He fell down on his knees. He said, I am a sinful man, O Lord. First of all, Heather, I'll just say this. I love where your head's at. Your head is thinking text. You're thinking remez. You're thinking all those kinds of things. And it could be Psalm 146. It's a great reference. It's not that the psalm doesn't go together with it. I spent a bunch of time today on Psalm 146. I don't necessarily see a remez there, mechanically speaking, as far as like, is there a tie? Is that what's being referenced? But I love exactly how your head is engaging the story. And when I taught that lesson, I was like, I was looking for a remez. And honestly, Psalm 146 is as good as anything I had up to that point, for sure. I got another email from another listener. Her name was Caitlin. Caitlin Staggs emailed me a long time ago, right after I had taught that episode. And she found a remez. I'll give this to you, Heather, and you can wrestle with this. The word drachma shows up in Ezra and Nehemiah in terms of rebuilding the temple. That one feels a little bit, there's an actual linguistic tie. There's an actual reference that's unique, what we call a unique reference. The idea of drachma. Drachma and drachma gets tied together. You have a similar theme. I have the temple there. In Ezra and Nehemiah, there could be the theme of repentance, confession. Those are just some. I really that there was just some juicy connections to potentially Ezra and Nehemiah with the drachma that fit the temple and potentially could fit the context of what Jesus is dealing with and what he's been teaching on. It's a possibility. So there you go. But I love where your head's at, Heather. I really do. It's great. Let's see here. E-months. I don't know if I'm saying I-months, E-months. Who knows? I'm not saying that probably correctly. They say, I've got a solid feeling I know you, something you get from spending so far almost 3 lessons of Bema podcast with you. I'm from Latvia, which is awesome, one of the Baltic states. And gradually your deeply educational and spiritually eye-opening teachings are spreading here as well. Ooh, wonder if I get to come to Latvia soon. I'm sincerely grateful for your work. I think I'm going to see Brent's face here pop in. There he is.
I just want to say, I got to visit Estonia last fall, and I don't know how similar the Baltic states are, but if Latvia is half as delightful as Estonia was, I would love to go there. And Imants, or however you say your name, if you want to be on the map of discussion groups, whether you have a group or not, if it's just you, we can still put you on the map. But I look at the map when I am planning my travels, and yeah, it would just be if you want me to show up someday, that would be a really good way to do it. So get in touch because I'd love to get Latvia on the map.
Estonia is right next door. Is that a next door neighbor to Latvia?
It's 2 countries out.
2 countries. See my geography? It's bad.
I wasn't that close, but I was pretty close in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Well, I love it. I love it. Here's what Amant says. I've got a question. Perhaps you've already answered in some podcasts. What is your take on humanity's age? I haven't answered that in a podcast. Probably not even going to really answer it here. In session 1, you specifically explained the symbolism of creation story and that it's not a meticulous timeline. Yet, what do we make of the time span starting from Adam till now that has been filled with exact life lengths of all the genealogy persons, it's about 6,000 years. Could it be that the first 5 days of creation took millions or billions of years, and then Adam was introduced in a perfectly created earth, and it was 6,000 years ago? Or something else? I would greatly appreciate a link to your podcast or some blog post about that topic. Don't have a link for you, don't have a blog post, don't have an episode. But yeah, part of what we were doing in session 1, as we kind of looked at Genesis and those stories, was we were trying to reorient how we posture ourselves as we read those. Instead of the how was creation made, instead of the Western trying to identify what happened, how it happened, or even when it happened, we were trying to reframe those stories. When I do that, I feel like I get a healthier I feel like I have a healthier reference point in relationship to these stories, where I'm not necessarily trying to make the mechanics of those things work. Because when I look at those genealogies, I mean, you can read them literally. I'm not trying to poke fun at any of those things. For me, the more historically grounded narrative that I might read in a more literal way, is generally going to be Abraham. Abraham, the story of Avram, the story of the character of Avram, shows up in multiple cultures. Things seem to generally line up. There's definitely seems to be based on some general history. Genesis 1 through 11, and we tried to point this out in the podcast, really seems to be a retelling of folklore that they are used to. And that doesn't mean that that folklore is not based on real happenings. It just means that Genesis 1 through 11 is a lot more squishy. It's all these it's this meta narrative, big, high, 10,000 foot perspective level origin stories. And I just read them with a lot less of a literal pin. I mean, yes, they give exact age references. Absolutely. Some of their ages are a millennia long. Now, I get that, like, the earth was a different place and maybe the environment and all the answers in Genesis stuff. I understand that. But 1,000 years? It just seems like trying to force, it feels like we're forcing something when the story is probably trying to do something with, whether it's numerology, whether it's gematria. I'm not saying that it is. I'm not necessarily equipped to do person by person, number by number. I just know that there's a handful of numbers in those genealogies. And when I look at it, I go, huh, that makes sense. 777 years. Oh, that makes sense. 365. That's more of a Gregorian calendar breakdown, but there are numbers that are like that for their own calendars. So I think there are lessons within those numbers, within those genealogies, that aren't necessarily about, here's the record of exactly what happened, here's the facts, now do the math. I don't think that's what Genesis 1 through 11 is doing. I don't think Judaism typically tries to do that with, especially Adam. So, I mean, your answer to your actual question is, what's my take on humanity's age? Well, I'm going to try to let the experts be the experts, because I'm not an expert. I'm not a scientist. I don't do geological work. I don't whatever. I've experienced enough to know that I've stood in all kinds of geological formations with people that are trained in that work. I've stood in archaeological ruins that are pretty darn close to 5,000-6,000. These ancient pre-Abrahamic, I've put my feet in things that seem to be at least that old, and I've had people say, and this over here predates that by. I'm going to let the experts be the experts. So when I have so many scientific minds that at this point in our human consciousness of development and the things that we know and the things that we've learned say that the universe is 14.6 billion years old, I go, okay, works for me. I'm no scientist. I know that there was a day when I was trained. I would read these fun books in Bible college where I would be trained to give an apologetic answer for why. Oh, come on. I can remember leading lessons as a young, dumb 19-year-old talking about uranium-248 halo atom halo radiation rings. Do you think I know anything about radiation rings of a uranium? Come on. But I had read a book that told me this is what this means. This is what you say. I'm going to let the experts be the experts. I'm going to let the geologists be the geologists. So the good news is I don't have to have an age for humanity. So heck if I know. But when somebody tells me this is an old earth, I'm like, okay, cool. I don't think the Bible's arguing that. I don't think the Bible's trying to say yes or no to that. I think the Bible's having a different conversation. The Bible's like, okay, cool. Here's what I want to tell you about humanity. Right? So, what the earth is 14. Here's where humanity came from. Okay, that's fine. But let me tell you about what that humanity is like. But we keep trying to make it about like, okay, but did we come from like a literal person and his name was Adam? And it feels like the biblical conversation is kind of like, that's just a weird conversation to have, when instead I want to talk to you about what mankind, which is what Adam's name means, what mankind is like. Let's talk about that, because that's going to get at the root of who I am and why I am the way that I am. Brent is suggesting rapid fire for these last 3 questions. Let's see if we can pull this off. It's 10:01. Shoot! You caught me off guard with that. One. I like that. You probably caught everybody else off guard with that one. Whew. Okay, here we go. Stacy says, I've been re-listening to episode on Leviticus and started digging into the sermon. From real life on the Palouse, it was mentioned something about the 2 goats of the Day of Atonement being reflected in the story of Cain and Abel, Isaac and Ishmael, as well as Jesus. But if Jesus is a sacrificial lamb, who is the one that gets sent into the wilderness? Who is the second goat? That's a great question, Stacy. In John, Jesus is portrayed very directly as the Azazel, which is the scapegoat, not the sacrificial lamb. I've wrestled with whether or not Jesus is supposed to be both, but I don't actually see that happening in John. Maybe it's happening in the other Gospels. Maybe John is actually riffing off of the other Gospels. I mean, the other character that I keep trying to make fit is Barabbas. Like, I want to make him the scapegoat and Jesus but it doesn't work on a whole host of different levels. Like, they literally put a crown of thorns. They make a point of talking about the crown of thorns. He's led out by a Gentile. They scream in John. They don't scream crucify him. They scream crucify him once, but then they scream take him away, which in the Hebrew is Azazel. Like, they're literally shouting scapegoat. If they're shouting in Hebrew. So I can't remember if it's Aramaic. I can't remember which. But Jesus is the scapegoat in John. When John says, here's the lamb that takes away the sin, which lamb? We always assume a sacrificial lamb. We always assume Passover lamb for some reason, but that's not in that passage at all. That passage is this, if the lamb that takes away, what lamb takes away the sin? Like, what lamb literally takes away the sin? Scapegoat. See, I think Jesus is the scapegoat. I don't think Jesus is a sacrificial lamb in John's framing. In John's framing, I think he's the scapegoat. What's the sacrificial lamb then? I don't know. I haven't answered that question. It's a good one. Sam says, I'm in session 3 of the podcast. In session 1, knowing when to say enough, Brett and Marty talk about the phrase in the cool of the day and how deep it goes, and they haven't mentioned it since. I have tried Googling it, but haven't come up with anything solid. Can you point me in the direction of the depth of the scripture? I'm going to try to do this fast. The cool of the day seems to reference the Hebrew phrase actually is in the breeze of the day. Most scholars seem to think that the cool of the day is when the day is starting to cool down, when the breeze starts to blow, the sun is setting, the shade is coming out, and the breeze is kind of starting to blow. That's all fine. That's really not the point that I was gunning at when I talked about how cool of the day is, because the cool of the day would be held against the heat of the day. So they walked in the cool of the day in the Garden of Eden, but then throughout the story, we keep getting reference to the heat of the day, like Abraham is sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Well, Jewish tradition said the heat of the day can be an idiom for Gehenna. What's Gehenna? Gehenna is the word for hell. And so the Midrash talks about Abraham sitting at the door of his tent in the middle of Gehenna, the heat of the day. And the Midrash goes on to talk about how Abraham sits at the entrance to hell, and his faithfulness, Abraham, the father of faith, his faithfulness, his trust is what he sits at the door of hell, keeping everybody out of hell. Like it's his faithfulness that keeps us from wandering into the gates of Hades, which is just, I mean, it's a crazy midrash, neither here nor there, but it's just so beautiful. And if I had 10 more minutes, I'd get into that. What I'll have Brent do is he has a link there from Chabad. And the article is crazy. It's crazy bananas. It will talk about Job, and it will talk about where Job comes from. And I wish I could do that. I wanted to do 20 minutes on the whole Job thing. But you just read. I'm not saying that article is like spot on. I'm not saying that article is right. I'm just saying that article is going to experiment with a lot of different midrash in terms of the heat of the day. And I relate the heat of the day to the cool of the day. Because the cool of the day was what was in the garden. The heat of the day is what we experience in we would say, fallen, in the broken, shalom, distorted world that we live in. So there you go. Last one, Macy, I have a question pertaining to the placement of Jonah. My women's Bible study is reading the prophets as Marty and Brent have ordered them. We've recently been reading through Jonah, and Marty put Jonah as an Assyrian prophet, but all of our Bible's commentaries have put him as a pre-Assyrian prophet. We were wondering what the reason evidence of Marty putting Jonah as a prophet after Assyria came and put Israel under its thumb. Honestly, that's super weird. I'm not necessarily surprised. The prophets always get dated in all kinds of crazy places for different reasons. I don't know why they would make Jonah pre-Assyrian. I mean, isn't the whole point of Jonah that Assyria is in power? Maybe they're insinuating that Assyria hasn't conquered Israel yet, but they're like a foreign power, maybe. I would imagine that they're either trying to make history work and that they're trying to like be like, well, when did Assyria repent? Assyria never repented. So literally, historically, it had to have been before their kingdom rose to power. They might be looking at Kings, and there's a reference to a Jonah in Kings that puts him, I believe, in probably a pre-Assyrian time period. Maybe they're putting all of these pieces of evidence together, and saying, see, but the perspective of the book of Jonah, the Jewish perspective of the book of Jonah, is that Assyria is they're the conquering power, that Jonah is being sent to the people that are now crushing and have been crushing God's people. From a textual, like if you actually want evidence, from a textual critic perspective, I've never seen anybody put Jonah, even Assyrian. Like Jonah is probably written, so it's probably a much later prophet, written almost as a hindsight satirical critique of a Judaism trying to deal with their enemies in exile. So to be honest, it's probably even later than Assyrian if you want like evidence-based scholarship criticism. It probably isn't. I haven't dated it late enough. Like if you just spend some time on Wikipedia, not that Wikipedia is your authority. I'm just saying, like, just try to find sources. Obviously, your study Bibles are doing. My study Bibles were doing the exact opposite. So it all depends on what study Bibles we're using, and who's printing it and what's their agenda. But like, if you jump on Wikipedia, I would assume that Jonah's probably not getting an early date as far as just the general consensus of textual criticism of scholarship, literary scholarship. So there you go. I don't know. It could be. I could make that make sense. I don't think I want to make that make sense. I think there's probably an agenda behind your study Bible wanting to make that make sense. Feels like it's probably coming from a more traditional, more literal, historical rendering of Jonah. So, I mean, that would make sense why they're doing that, and they probably have some decent reasons in their mind of why that would be the case. So, yeah, you put it there. I've seen prophets put all over the place in crazy spots, and often for good reasons. So there you go. Could be Macy. I almost said Mary. Macy. All right. Play it again, Brent. Dude, I'm so here for the theme music.
It's not, we still left a dozen questions on the live cutting room floor. but we got to a pretty
Yeah,
good number of them. And we
yep,
had a big list of pre-submitted stuff this month.
we
And it's
did. I
not
don't
going
know
to get
why it
any
was so
better.
heavy.
I don't know, but we're going to go 2 months before our next Q&A, so it's not going to get any better.
I'm gonna get
But,
mean. I'm just cut questions out. I'm just be like, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough.
well, and the whole idea of this is just to explore the ideas and provide resources and teach us how to think and how to ask questions and how to wrestle with these ideas. We don't have all the answers. Hopefully, we have some good resources to offer or some things that can point you in the right direction. Um, but yeah, we can't solve all of your problems.
Nope.
Oh goodness. Where do people pre-submit questions, Marty? Where would they do that?
I mean, it's not that we're necessarily encouraging it, but if they did, they would use the contact form on the website. That goes to one of our fancy pants team members, Brian, and he sends those questions to all the right appropriate places. And a lot of those Bible questions end up in a parking lot document, and we have to go through and pick and say which one of these questions is going to end up in the conversation. And so we direct traffic that way. So there you go. It's the best way. It's really the only way. We try to keep them off of social media. We try to funnel everything to the contact form. But the
Yeah, because
live
a lot of
questions,
people will
if I
write
could
in
keep,
questions, and Marty has already created some kind of an FAQ
yeah,
video, or we have some other resource that we can point people to. Because a lot of the questions we're answering are from,
yep,
weeks or potentially months ago. Like if it
yep,
gets funneled away to save for Elle or Reed or Josh, like it could be a year. So if we can provide some sort of resource faster than that, like it's a good way to do that too, rather than waiting around for a live. There's just too many questions. Like we can't address
there
every
is.
single thing. So hopefully we're providing enough resources that people can do their own research and find stuff in the meantime, even if we don't get to it, even if we don't have a good resource or whatever. And sometimes this stuff is just it's just not ready to be discovered yet, and so we have to wait as
Indeed.
a community. But I wanted
Indeed.
to throw in one last live comment from Anna Michelle. She said, "I love hearing all your arguments between each other. They're so funny to listen to." And
That's good because not everybody shares that affinity. So that's good to know that some people enjoy it like we do.
I take it to mean that Anna Michelle does, truly enjoy it. I'm reading that comment with a good eye, but I would just quibble with the word argument. Uh, it's a discuss. It's maybe a lively discussion, but it's. I think we all have immense respect for each other. I don't necessarily want to speak for everyone. Maybe Reed hates us all. I don't know. We'll find out when he's on the Q&A. But
I certainly hate
I
Reed,
love all these
so
people. Well, the Chiefs thing really puts him at a disadvantage.
it does.
But I love all of these people, and we're all like I love the hearts of everyone on this team. We're all doing our best. We're all coming at it with the spirit and the approach that God has given us. And yeah, we're not always going to come to the same conclusions, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're arguing. I mean, Anna Michelle is not. She says, splitting hairs now, are we? I truly love listening to you all. Yes, that is my spiritual gift is splitting hairs. But yeah, we all have our thing that we're coming to the table with, and sometimes that brings a livelier discussion than other times. But yeah, we love each other, and we have so much fun, and are so blessed to be able to do this work. And we're so thankful that so many of you have chosen to join us in this spiritual wrestling match with the text and with God's mission in the world and everything else. So yeah, I just want to say thank you again for the
Indeed.
opportunity to do this work.
Yep. All right. Well, that'll probably do it. We'll see everybody in July. They need to have a good June. Have a good beginning to your summer.
July 18th, July 19th in some parts of the world, but we'll be back and we'll continue continue the work.
Yep. All right, everybody. Thanks again.